Howdy, folks. I'm Nara backwards.
What? Oh, I get it now. I guess I'd be Rebma.
Yeah? Backwards.
Rebma backwards, yeah. Spring this on me without telling me what your plans are.
Amber's like, how am I supposed to think on my feet like that, Brian?
That's Dr. Professor Amber to you.
Dr. Professor Amber. Yeah, I guess we have exciting stories to tell about at the end of the video.
Yes, we do.
So, if you want to hear a little bit of our excitement on our day, stick around till the end of the video, and we'll reveal that. I'm sure the wait will have been totally worth it.
Yeah, it's so riveting.
Riveting. All right. For reals now, I'm Brian.
I'm Amber.
And here's some Reddit. All right. Our first story is titled, Am I a Jerk for Refusing to Take a DNA Test to Keep an Inheritance? Throwaway account. I'm a 25-year-old male and having a clash of morals and obligations and would like some outside perspective. When I was 13, my parents died and I was raised by my parental grandparents. It was the easiest choice since they lived in the same area when my parents were alive and visited them frequently. I am my grandparents' only grandchild, as my aunt, 43, is child-free, so when they passed on, they left me their house. The current total value of the house is around $500,000. And that's lowballing the estimates, and it's fully paid off, so I basically have a really good head start in life, although I could never imagine selling it. Recently, I was approached by a man, a 38-year-old male, John, claiming to be my grandfather's son and would like a DNA test to verify it. I was shocked. I didn't believe him and I told him to F off because that would mean that my grandfather cheated on my grandmother. He also contacted my aunt and she recognized him as the neighbor's kid who moved away years ago. Apparently, my grandparents were friends with his parents, but then one day there was a huge fight and the couple moved away. John stated that his mom had an affair with my grandfather, and when the husband found out, he divorced his mom, and they were forced to sell the house. John said that his mom's husband wanted nothing to do with him since he wasn't sure if he was the father and abandoned him. Years later, John tracked him down, and after a DNA test was confirmed that he wasn't the father, John's mom confessed that the only other possible candidate was my grandfather. John's mom insisted her ex was the father for years. My aunt lives in another country, so John has been asking me to do a DNA test so that he can finally know for sure who his father is. I was willing to do it until my girlfriend, a 26-year-old female, brought up the issue of the ownership of the house. I did a quick check, and if the DNA test proves that John is indeed my grandfather's son, he might be able to sue for a share of the estate. If it came down to it, I would be forced to sell my home because there's no way I could buy out even a third of the share if John wanted it. I contacted John and said that I would be willing to do a DNA test, but only under the condition that he signs away any rights or claims to the house if he's proven to be my grandfather's son via paperwork that my lawyers will draw up. I didn't hear from John for days, but then got an angry call from a woman claiming to be his wife who called me greedy and selfish, that I couldn't possibly know the pain of him not knowing who my father is, and that my grandfather owes John. I hung up on her and contacted a lawyer. So far, unless John can present enough evidence to create doubt, he doesn't have much of a case, especially since the possible father is already deceased. While I'm content never giving John what he wants until he waives his rights, and my aunt won't either. His wife began stalking me on social media and putting me on blast. Am I the jerk? Edited to add, just in case it wasn't clear and to give more info. My aunt is aware of everything and supports me in what I'm doing. My grandparents' will was very clear, unlike the writing in this paragraph. Once they both passed, I get the house. My aunt got their life insurance policy. We split the remainder of their savings, and the sentimental items were to be given to the designated people. There was no mention of giving anything for a possible secret long-lost child. My grandparents were cremated, so John wouldn't even be able to request that my father be dug up for a test, although my aunt and I haven't told him that. I did initially block his wife, but she created other accounts. I'm an American, and I live in the U.S. So, okay. Difficult situation. What do you think of all this stuff here?
It's a perplexing situation a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
From a legal standpoint, I think OP is handling everything legally correct, and I also understand his feelings of attachment to this house and not wanting to sell it because this is the house, his grandparents owned, that he was presumably raised in as soon as they took him in, so it's his family home. And it does seem a little strange that this guy just kind of shows up out of the blue, asks for a DNA test, and when OP's like, okay, but then you can't claim anything, all of a sudden his wife is telling OP that you are horrible, selfish, and your grandfather owes my husband.
Yeah, well, the owes my husband bit is the part that I think that, he probably didn't care up to the point where he realized that he might have, like, a stake in this. Like, if he had been that invested in finding, his real father, then why didn't he do this sooner? Why wait until he's already gone? And I can also understand OP's hesitation to, like, undigging the truth and finding out for sure.
Yeah, well, that's a tough thing if you have to come to terms with the fact that someone, you knew in a certain way cheated on your beloved grandmother.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to be an easy thing to...
No, and that's a really difficult situation because then you have to deal with that. And, like, certainly I feel for John in the situation that, he may very well not know who his grandparents are. Or father, rather. But again... why did his mom lie to him all these years? And, if, I don't know, like, it seems like a very complicated situation from their end.
Yeah, it certainly does seem complicated. And, like, I understand that if, John finds out that, his father may have had some means why he'd want a portion of the estate, but also... Because, like, isn't that the dream of just hoping that there was some wealthy relative who's just going to, like, give you a big chunk of money so then you're set for a little while?
Some long-lost relative that you have no emotional baggage to, so you don't have to even feel guilty about the acquiring the, monetary gain.
Yeah. So, because OP is a stranger to him, and so he actually, I'm just thinking now, like, if he grew up knowing the grandfather as, like, a neighbor and stuff, he may not have wanted to take things directly from the grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
But OP's a stranger to him, so if he can take OP's inheritance, that might be a little, like, less fraught for him.
Yeah, it could very well be.
Or, the grandfather may have made it explicit that he's not entitled to anything or something like that if the guy approached him sooner or something.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation. I do feel bad for John in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying that I don't have any sympathy towards John and his situation. I'm just saying, in general, I don't know that I can necessarily blame OP entirely for their actions here.
Right. Like, I think if I was in OP's shoes, I would do the same thing. Well, actually, I'd probably be more trusting and just, like, not assume the worst unless you're like, Amber, don't. And then, like... Because I'm kind of naive like that, and I would just be like, oh, a DNA test, sure.
No, I mean, you already have your DNA out there.
On Ancestry, yeah.
So if someone wanted to find out if they were related to you.
Yeah, so far we've had no missing relatives pop up in my tree. Your tree's a different story.
Yeah, well, we did actually have a long-lost relative. Like, my grandmother we got a DNA test for my grandmother, and... It turns out that there was a long-lost relative in our family tree, and it was just a really interesting thing. But they didn't come out for an inheritance.
No, it was certainly not an inheritance thing. She just wanted to know her bio family.
Yeah.
And it actually was a very happy thing.
Yeah.
She was reunited with her half-brother, and he went down to live with her, and they're apparently, like, they get along great, and so...
Yeah. So I think, these kinds of things can be really great. They can be really interesting, and those kinds of things. But it seems like he may just very well be in it purely for the money, which, I mean, can you really necessarily blame him? But you also
No.
can't necessarily blame OP either.
That's the thing, is like, I can't blame him. I mean, I'd feel bad if I was in John's case at the idea of taking away someone else's stuff. Whereas if I was in OP's shoes, I mean, I think I would want to secure, like, because I have a lot of emotional attachment to things,
Yeah.
like, and so I would want to secure, like...
Well, yeah, I think the house in its own right is more than just a possession to him.
Yeah, it's like his childhood right
Yeah.
there.
So I can understand why OP would be really hard pressed to want to give up the house, because, like, they're not going to be able to afford to,
Buy
contest,
out. Yeah.
contest it in that respect. So I can see why they would not want to, have that, be faced with that conundrum.
Tea time?
It's tea time, I guess. Do you know what kind of tea I have today, Amber?
What kind?
You have to guess. I said guess.
It's in a Nessie. Forever Nuts. No, it doesn't smell like that. I can't smell it, actually.
It hasn't been steeping for very long. It's been steeping, well, I guess now actually for quite a bit of time, since we've been recording for quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
I keep bumping the microphone, so rip your ears. Sorry.
What kind of tea is it? Oh, I know that smell. Caramel shortbread.
Yep, caramel shortbread. Everybody's favorite game. What kind of tea is Brian drinking?
Our next story is, am I the jerk for having my wedding ceremony in sign language?
Yes.
No.
Only English.
No.
English is the only language weddings can be, done in.
Nope. I'm a 24-year-old female, and I'm deaf, and growing up, my parents got me bilateral cochlear implants and forced me into mainstream school, never taught me sign language, and never immersed me into my culture as a deaf person. They were actually pretty against me taking ASL at all. Well, I took ASL in high school against my parents' wishes, and then got into a deaf university. Although I couldn't sign fluently when I started, I finally felt accepted and understood. The deaf community was nothing but welcoming. I became fluent in ASL after a few months and stopped wearing my processors completely, as there was no need for them anymore. I honestly didn't realize how alone I had felt until I didn't feel that way anymore. I also met my fiancé at college. He is from a very large family of deaf people, hard of hearing. I'm not sure what CODA or SODA stand for, and everyone is fluent in sign. I love his family so much. We've been together for 4 years now. He proposed to me last May. We've been planning the wedding and decided to have it fully in ASL. The pastor at our church's deaf program agreed to do the ceremony. My extended family of hearing people is very small, just my mom, my dad, my sister, my brothers, my aunt, my uncle, and my cousin. My cousin is learning sign. Whereas my fiancé's huge extended family, who are all deaf or sign fluently, will be there, and most of our friends are deaf or no sign. We decided to get an interpreter for the hearing people, though, so they'd know what was going on. Our wedding is in August, so we just sent the invites. The invite mentions that it will be in ASL, but we'll have an interpreter for those who are signing impaired, which is kind of just a joke. But my mom started texting me and tried to convince me that it should be in English and have an ASL interpreter. I feel like it's our wedding, so we should have it in our first language, but my mom thinks that we are in America, so English should be the first language, and anyone who doesn't choose to get cured, get an implant, should get an interpreter.
Well said, Mom.
No. She also said it was disrespectful to say, signing impaired. I don't think she realizes the irony, as she always refers to me as hearing impaired. During the entire conversation, she kept repeating that I should have never let you go to that school. My mom also says that the deaf people should be used to having interpreters, whereas she's never had one before, so it will make it harder to understand. Am I the jerk here? Should I just have the ceremony in English because I guess that's the more normal way of communication, even though we consider our sign our primary language?
That poor mom. That poor mom.
Edited to clarify some things. I can't cut off my parents, as I'm currently helping pay for my little brother to go to a school for autistic kids. We can't sign and speak at the same time. The pastor and my fiancé can't speak, but I choose not to unless I absolutely have to. My parents didn't only not learn ASL, but they explicitly prevented me from it growing up. We lived in Austin, Texas my whole childhood, and there was a school for the deaf 10 minutes from our house, but they specifically said they would never let me go there. Adding this later, exact words from the invite. Reception will be held in ASL. English interpreters will be provided for the signing impaired. I literally put it in quotations. The deaf community didn't indoctrinate me into not wearing my processors. I just started using ASL more and more, and then I needed a surgery to adjust the implant, but I decided just not to get the surgery and stop wearing them. There was no real point in it, and I didn't feel like getting an unnecessary surgery. Another edit. To those of you questioning and even mad at me for not wanting to wear implants, you don't hear normally. Like a lot of people say things like, don't you want to hear music or birds chirping? Music through cochlear implants suck, at least for me. Even when I used to wear cochlear implants all the time, I would take them off to listen to music. And no, background noise like birds chirping makes it harder for the microphone to pick up other noises like people talking.
So,
I think
clear-cut case of them
OP's
being...
absolutely not the jerk.
Amber's like, I'm going to jump in here.
Yes.
Because Brian's being a smart person. I can't use Brian's being a smart jerk. I can't use my non-G-rated language.
Yes, you can't.
So, yeah, I mean, I thought this was just an interesting story in general.
Yeah. And I mean, I think OP is completely in the right here. I mean, this is their primary language for almost everyone who's going to be there.
Yeah.
And importantly, it's both her husband and pastor who, like, because the ceremony is going to be OP, her husband, and her pastor talking mostly.
Yeah.
And her husband and pastor already can't speak English, so that would put them in a really awkward position. If, like, it only makes sense to have it in ASL because, you know, for their benefit and also almost everyone else's.
Yeah, but I mean, the bigger point here, the husband can't even really speak.
Yeah.
And neither can the pastor, and so they're going to need an interpreter no matter what.
Right, and like, well, like, I understand the mom is frustrated because she's not used to having an interpreter, but maybe this will give her a look into what it's like for her daughter.
Yeah.
Which her reasoning there is so weird. Like, well, the deaf people always have interpreters, so they can just use them again. It's like, or maybe you can take this as an opportunity to see what it's like when things are provided not for your benefit first and foremost, but to everyone else's and then interpreted for you.
Yeah, well, and again, like, she could have took time and learned sign language. She knew that her daughter was learning sign language, and she never made an effort, and neither did the father. And it sounds like only one person in their entire family is taking any time to learn how to communicate with OP in the way that they're most comfortable with.
Yeah.
And the thing is that it sounds like OP says that the cochlear implants were just not very good for them. They weren't comfortable, and, you know, they just weren't hearing well, you know?
Yeah, well, from what I understand, like, depending on what your hearing level is, it can, because the hearing aids can amplify all the sound, all the ambient sound. So, like, if there's little tiny background sounds, those will get amplified as well. Because I was supposed to have a student this semester who's deaf, and she has a hearing aid that she could wear, but most of the time chose not to because all the background sounds get so amplified and it becomes overtaxing on her brain. So, and that sounds kind of like what OP is describing here. It's not like hearing things like you or I without a hearing impairment would. It's like all these little background noises are getting amplified just as the voices and everything else is.
Yeah, well, that, you know, noise level, I have to deal with this to some degree every time I, you know, edit these videos, because when you amplify audio, you also amplify noise, and, you know, you have to, you know, do some denoising and all kinds of stuff in order to amplify the audio, and yeah, otherwise it kind of sounds terrible, and, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, I think OP's parents were really big jerks by basically forbidding her from participating in deaf culture and ASL for the longest time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what the point in that was, other than it just seems like they wanted their daughter to be normal.
That's what it seems like, is they wanted to pretend like their daughter didn't have hearing impairment. They wanted to, basically ignore her disability as much as possible.
Well, and also, they spent all this probably time and money and energy giving her cochlear implants and stuff like that. They probably felt like it was wasted when she kind of rejected them and, chose to go with signing and stuff like that. But really, I think in a lot of ways they have themselves to blame for all of this, because if you force somebody, it doesn't mean that they're going to willingly do it. It just means they're going to be unwilling.
Yeah, and to deprive someone of a community because you don't feel like you belong there is really unfair.
Yeah.
Like, it seems like the parents is probably, a combination of things. It may partly be that they, aren't deaf themselves, so they don't need it, so why would she type of things. But no matter what their reasonings are, like, they should not have excluded her from this community for so long, and their reluctance to learn ASL or, try and help meet her needs in the ways that she needed, I think does not reflect well on them.
No. All right. Our next letter is titled, Am I a Jerk for Arguing with a College Presser?
College presser.
Amber just broke my shoulder.
Sorry. You said I broke...
You didn't even hurt me, Amber. Am I a jerk for arguing with a college professor during a big presentation? Today, one of my college courses, we had a big final project due before the end of the semester. It was basically being assigned into a group of 4, coming up with an invention of sorts and making a pitch like Shark Tank. The project is worth 200 points, 50 points for each member section, and I was the one in our group who had to present our product from a marketing perspective. Our professor was basically acting like a shark and told us ahead of time that he'd be asking questions during the presentation, just how like it would be done in Shark Tank. He also said that he'd be in character as an aggressive shark who is eager for a deal. We began our presentation, and immediately the professor began interrupting the leader's speaking part. He was indeed very aggressive in his questioning, but I figured that I could handle him. My part of speaking began, and I could barely get out a few sentences before the presenter began interrupting. He was asking multiple questions at once. He was gradually raising his voice, and he wouldn't let me speak or answer any of his multiple questions. It was starting to get really annoying, and when he interrupted me the 4th time and grilled me again, I snapped and yelled at him to shut the F up. I yelled at him that he's not a real shark and he needs to let me finish speaking. He began chewing me out for my language, and we just got into one big screaming match over Zoom. I kept yelling at him that he doesn't know what he's doing, and then I just logged out of Zoom in the middle of the presentation. I haven't heard from the professor, but I did hear from my 3 partners, and they all informed me that our group was automatically docked 50 points for my outburst and leaving. They were all especially upset since this project was a big part of our final grade, and our professor has said that other students in the past have failed the class simply because they failed the project. I kind of feel bad, but the professor was really getting on my nerves and being unnecessarily rude and abrasive as a shark. Am I a jerk for what I did? This one's a tough situation here.
Yeah.
I think that everyone's kind of a jerk in this situation. I don't necessarily think that OP's to solely blame here.
Certainly, yeah. I think by everyone, OP and the professor, there's nothing to indicate necessarily the other students.
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, the 2 parties involved.
Yeah.
The other members of the group, it really puts them in a bad position.
Yeah.
And I think that the professor's antagonistic attitude really is just not good. And I think that he's acting like one of these sharks and whatnot. And the point of school is to help build a foundation of knowledge. It isn't, and I mean, certainly dealing with aggressive and aggravating questions can sometimes be part of life, but I don't think that this was necessarily the right environment or right choice to be doing that. It sounds like he just likes the idea of being like a jerk.
Yeah, well, he sounds like one of those professors that probably prides himself on failing students, that he makes the final project so much of the grade and tells them, I failed students in the past for failing this project. Like, he's put so much stress and pressure. Like, if I was in this class, I would have just died of anxiety. Like,
yeah. Well, it doesn't sound like everyone has to present too.
No, it does. It sounds like they go one at a time.
Oh, okay. It sounded to me like there were just some people who had to present, not everyone necessarily. But I mean, but either way, I don't think that he should be being aggressive like this.
Yeah, like, again, I don't think this is, like, there is a time and place for this sort of thing. Like, this isn't really, like, most students aren't going to go on Shark Tank.
Yeah.
And it's not clear what kind
Basically, none of his students are going to go on Shark Tank. And how many people are going to actually be in a situation where they're getting aggressively questioned like this? That's TV entertainment. That isn't real life. Like, if your boss starts coming at you with like this, then you probably have a hostile work environment and should find a new job.
Exactly. So this just sounds so hostile. And so I don't fault the student for getting flustered, but I also don't think they handled it very well.
No. Speaking of hostile environments in academia.
So we had to go through to defend our dissertations, and I also had to do a dissertation proposal where I had to defend my project idea. Mine weren't necessarily actively hostile, but like when you're being grilled with questions, like it does feel like an attack.
Yeah.
And although I just wanted to yell, I don't know, and cry in a corner, like that was kind of I wouldn't have yelled at them to shut up or anything like that. I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, why am I here? Just stop, leave me alone. I want to cry.
Well, the thing is that, like, even in a situation where the people aren't being aggressive or like being that attacking here, it's still very stressful to present ideas.
Yeah.
And, I think that under these kind of situations where this professor is doing here, it's just completely inappropriate. I think that it shows an utter lack of regard for students and their ability and respecting them. I don't know. I think that just shows no respect towards them.
And I wonder, like, if students have disability accommodation, because I mean, I imagine he probably, if this is a big class, he probably has anxious students.
Yeah.
Like, and this is a next level of anxiety. Like, as someone with documented anxiety, like my dissertation defense and dissertation proposal processes were both really inflamed, triggered my anxiety, however you want to talk about it. And so I can only imagine, I mean, I know this is a little more small scale, but it's still really big. It's like, determining whether they're going to pass the class or not. And so that's going to be really hard for students with anxiety issues.
Yeah. Now, I personally have had someone who was almost probably as antagonistic as this during my actual dissertation defense.
Which determined whether Brian was going to get his PhD or not.
Basically, the final step in everything, right? One professor who was new to our school, I won't name any names, of course, but he did not like my project. He wasn't on my committee, so he didn't actually have a say on whether I passed or not. But the thing is, like, if you basically raise enough questions as to whether or not someone should pass, then, I mean, that's kind of weighed heavily. So he was doing his best to question my, research and my presentation and whatnot.
Yeah.
And these were very aggressive questions, probably at least as aggressive as what this professor was doing. Like, I would start explaining a question that he asked, he would interrupt me to ask another question. It's supposed to be an hour-long presentation. It dragged out for 2.5 hours, kind of thing. So he was the entire time just grilling me and whatnot. And no, I did not blow up at him. I was actually very nice about it.
Yeah, well, you stayed very collected. I tend to talk faster when I get nervous, and I get a little but I think I didn't blow up at anyone either. I tried my best to answer the questions, and so I think that is an important thing to learn how to do, to be able to, when people are being kind of hostile or even not just hostile necessarily, because again, in my case, they weren't being hostile or antagonistic. They were just trying to suss out, are there holes in this type of things.
Yeah.
It's still really important to learn how to convey that effectively under pressure.
Yeah. Certainly, like, you should know how to convey information under pressure, but I think that the artificial pressure that this teacher constructed was just, I think, inappropriate, especially for this level of class.
Yeah.
It doesn't even seem like it was a graduate level class or anything like that. And I mean, what lesson was he trying to convey here? Like, oh, if you end up, blowing up at somebody, you fail? I don't know.
Well, and that he would, just dock the whole group those 50 points.
Yeah.
Like, professors who make that kind of group assignment where you're all so dependent on each other are...
Like, one person can cause you to fail. That's not a fair system.
Yeah.
That provides no learning experience other than don't trust people.
Yeah, exactly. Because, the best this group could do now is a 75, and that's if they did everything perfect.
Yeah.
So I feel really bad for the other students who, put, in a lot of time and energy and didn't blow up on the professor and are now affected because of it. And again, I understand that this was a really stressful situation. But I do think that with the other students' grades on the line, the best course of action would have been to just try and answer things the best he could and not blow up on the professor.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that he was right for blowing up on the professor, but I also don't think the professor was right for...
I want to say, stress again and again, I think the professor is, the one here who is doing the most harm. It is intentional on his part that he's being really aggressive. But I think it also would be helpful to OP to try finding other ways of dealing it when you feel like you're in an antagonistic situation.
Yeah. All right, folks. That's all the time we have for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, consider giving me a like. If you didn't, consider giving me a dislike. So, Amber, what did you do today?
I went to a virtual hooding ceremony.
Yeah, so we both missed our hooding ceremonies when we graduated because of the state of the world right now.
They didn't have one for the 2020 grads.
Basically, they didn't have one, and then they said they were going to cancel it. And then they were like, okay, fine. I guess there was a big enough uproar and that they decided that they would have one. So we did a virtual hooding today being Wednesday, when we're recording this. So, yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. I kept, so they were doing it alphabetically by first name, and my name is Amber, and they did the doctoral students first, and I was just like, please don't let me be first, please don't let me be first, please don't let me be first, and they're like, and we're gonna read our first name. Amber Hathaway is receiving her Doctor of Philosophy in Physics as advised by Charles T. Hess, and I was like, and so then we get to hood me. So you have to turn your camera on, so that took a moment to figure out, and because I have your camera off until then. Go to hand Brian my hood, and he starts putting on me upside down. I'm like, Brian, it's upside down. And so he pulls it off, pulls my tam off, the little fancy hat we get for it. And so I had to grab my hat, and we eventually get my hood on. But I had the most epic hooding of all of them. Brian's went a little more smoothly, I'd say.
Yeah. But that's our interesting story for the day. All right. Well, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you all tomorrow. I hung up on her and contacted John.
I contacted John.